What's up, my friends? I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And have you ever had to make one of those gigantic decisions about life? It's like moving or getting a new job or getting a new house, or maybe you're in the stage in life where you got somebody that you really like and you're like, hey, we're going to go from the whole dating thing to the whole maybe engagement thing. And maybe some of these are the kind of questions where you find yourself going back and forth. You're hot and you're cold. You're trying to figure out what exactly you want to do, and you wrestle with it, and you go to bed at night and you're like, yeah, this is the thing. And then the next day the light is out and stuff feels different. And I got to recalculate the whole business again. I think that is a very normal human process. I don't think that's indecision. I think that's the way a lot of us evaluate really big, weighty things. And likewise, in the middle of the book of Matthew, I think we are seeing the disciples right there. And in fact, in the middle of the book of Matthew, I feel like we're almost moving from Jesus being the point of view character, where we're encountering all of these tensions and these miracles and everything through his experience, even though we can't fully relate to it. It's like there's a shift where the further we get into it, the more it's like we're seeing the whole thing from the point of view of the disciples. And the claims of the text are so grandiose, even just socially, let alone the time and space break the laws of physics and nature stuff. The claims are so grandiose, the implications are so big, and Jesus is so clear on everything that he almost becomes less relatable in that way as we move along, which is not to say that Jesus is like a poor character, or a poorly written or developed character in this literary sense. Jesus is being exactly what Jesus is supposed to be. The more he seems like God in the flesh, the more he seems focused on pushing through whatever mess he has to push through to do the kingdom stuff that he is here to do, the more he's going to seem other to an extent to the reader. But the disciples, they've been there through the whole thing, and they're not exactly sure what to make of it all, but they become more like how we see stuff. They're weighing all of this data, and they're hot, and they're cold, and they do the math one time, and it seems like they nail it, and then they do the math the next day, and it seems like maybe they're not tracking. And the passage we just looked at yesterday, that's exactly what's going on. There's a big, tense confrontation. There's yelling. Things are heating up and getting weird. Maybe some of the disciples during this yelling between the Pharisees and Sadducees and Jesus are like, is this it? Are we going to have a riot? Are we going to get killed here? Do we get arrested? Can you get religious arrested? I think we should maybe leave. And now Jesus isn't backing down. It's getting more tense. And they get in a boat and they leave and sail to the other side of the Sea of Galilee again. Maybe they get to exhale a little bit. And then Jesus is offhandedly, well, I don't think it's offhandedly with Jesus. He seems like he's pretty intentional about stuff. But he's like, hey, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they're like, dang it. We forgot the bread. That's like Jesus code for we forgot sandwiches. We're such idiots. What are we doing? And then Jesus knows what their discussion is. He's like, no, I just mean like yeast. Remember how we talked about it before? It spreads through everything metaphorically. We don't want their yeast becoming a yeast infection that spreads through everything. So watch out for that stuff. Those guys aren't trustworthy. Focus on the kingdom stuff. And then the disciples are like, oh, okay, we understand. And they're back on track. But through the last few chapters, what a difficult ride it would be for them. Like they have to tackle the question of what do we do with outsiders? Because we were raised and coached to believe that they're operating in a different way outside the boundaries of the grace of the God of our people. And what do we do with these crazy miracles we're seeing? And also, should we be sensitive around our rabbi and our teacher right now? Because he's probably pretty sad about that beheading, because that's a super sad thing. And then before that, he taught us a bunch of parables, and there were a lot to take in. We maybe sort of understand that. He's talking about this sign of Jonah thing. Is he going to die? Does he die soon? And if he dies, like, what do we do at that point? And it seems like he's kind of hard on his own family, and like he's creating a new family. Are we like his family now? There's just a lot for them to wrestle through, but there is this one giant thing that is still hanging out there, my friends, that to you and me is like, it's part of the name. It's Jesus, it's the Christ, it's the Messiah, it's the Son of God. These are just titles that are attributed to him that roll off the tongue like everything that comes after Daenerys Targaryen's name. It's just, that's who Jesus is. We're so used to saying that. For you and me, with 2,000 years of history behind us, the idea that Jesus is held out by the Bible as being the Son of God, God in the flesh, the Messiah, the Christ, is almost pedestrian. Like, of course that's who he is. But do you notice that no one other than demons has really confidently and clearly dared to utter those titles, that specific title, Son of God, or the Christ specifically regarding Jesus. It's a high-stakes thing. Like now you can say it, and I mean, people might be mad on Twitter or get after you and be like, I don't like God, I don't like Jesus very much, and you just agree to disagree, whatever. But you're not going to pay a gigantic price. In this culture, man, you come out and say that person's the Messiah and they're not the Messiah, even very recent history at this point would tell you, ooh, be careful with that. There are consequences to getting that kind of language and that kind of proclamation incorrect. Violent consequences, if you will. So on the one hand, once again, we are tempted to view the disciples as being wishy-washy, indecisive, and something of a disappointment. But on the other hand, if we are to be fair, once again, I think we have to acknowledge probably most of us wouldn't have even been in the boat. Most of us would have been back on the other side of the lake being like, yeah, good job, Pharisees and Sadducees, you totally won that. That guy's a jerk. You did a really good job. And just remember that I thought that and I said that. We would have been virtue signaling to be on the side of that which was popular and easy. And maybe we would have been doing some mental math in our heads about who Jesus might be. But most of us would not have taken the risk to say it, no matter how fun it is to imagine us being the enlightened heroes of the New Testament. We just probably wouldn't have been. The majority of people weren't. But these few guys were. And so I guess we can maybe pardon their hotness and their coldness just a little bit, because they really are trying to do the math on a very important, very big, very weighty question that is going to shape their own future, the future of their family, the future of their name, their reputation, the future of how they die, and the future of, I don't know, I guess you go all of human history for the rest of eternity. This is a gigantic deal. And in a way, you got to give him credit for doing what Jesus said, count the cost. He talked about the smart thing to do in light of these claims is to add it up real carefully, do the math on it before you decide what's going on. But the pregnant question by the time we get to Matthew 16 is he God in the flesh? Is that God? I mean, he's doing all this stuff. Is that the Messiah? Is this it? Is this the guy? Is this the human who is the centerpiece of history, regardless of what religion you're into, regardless of what philosophy you're into, regardless of what kind of music you listen to on the radio or where you hang out and what type of social media you do? Like, just all of that aside, is there one human being who transcends all of it, who is going to show up at some point and make sense of all of it, and not just make sense of the arguments, but solve the deepest elements of the human problem, like failure and time and death? Is this the guy? Well, there's a name for that guy in this culture, and it's the Messiah. But you attribute stuff like that to the wrong person, you look like a total chump. So before we roll into the next passage, which is going to be Matthew 16, starting in verse 13, which is a very famous and very important passage, I just wanted to take one day to set the table here, acknowledge that the disciples have understandably been a little bit up and down, trying to make sense of all that they're seeing, trying to make sense of who it exactly is, who they are following, and trying to run the mental math equation of whether it would be prudent for them in front of everybody, or even around a super secret little campfire in front of only each other and Jesus, to utter what are very risky words, those being, hey, Jesus, I think you might be the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. And somebody is going to take the lead in the next passage and finally speak to that question that the original audience would have been dying to hear spoken to. We're about to get into the very intimate, very meaningful, very theologically profound, with ginormous implications for you and me, deep water of the book of Matthew here next time around. Hopefully, that setup is just going to make it all that much more fun. And as is so often the case, there is a last thing on the way out the door. And the last thing on the way out the door is that I wanted to say thank you for a significant group of you who have decided to go and sponsor a kid in Uganda through Africa Renewal. That's just huge. The people who are doing this labor really hard. I mean, all of their thought and effort and energy is to figure out how to put food in the bellies of kids who need it in a country where it's tough to get food, how to get them education, how to provide them with healthcare and make their lives better, and put the stuff about Jesus in front of them. And I know it's been a huge encouragement to them and to me, and most importantly, to kids in Uganda who are now sponsored. It's been a huge encouragement to all of us to see those signups come in. If you're thinking about sponsoring a child in Uganda, $40 a month will completely change their lives. And you can do that at africarenewal.org/TMBH. Thanks again for thinking seriously about that. And thanks to Africa Renewal for partnering up and letting me try to make myself useful on their project they're doing here of trying to get 1,000 kids sponsored. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.